How's it going, YouTube? Coming to you today with another video, and today, guys, the video is going to be where to hand trap. Now, I'm very excited for this one because there's been so many different events going on, and I really want to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information as possible, as a lot of the lines are being ironed out for each deck. Now we know a little bit more about how the cards interact with the Fiendsmith cards, as we're starting to see more list hopping, like Maliss Fiendsmith, and then we have the Ryzeal Fiendsmith, and of course, Cash Fiendsmith. So Fiendsmith is going to be the biggest thing that you have to worry about going into an event. It's going to be 90% of the room wherever you go. It's going to be very, very strong. And a lot of the older decks are going to be hand trapped a little bit differently now. I'm only talking about the top 5 decks in the game right now today. So I do hope that you enjoy this video. I do hope that it helps. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over on Imperium Duelist, Dragonshield, Gem, Cloud, RW, or Grimoire, definitely go ahead and do so, all down below. Also, subscribe to the channel so we can hit our goal of 30,000. If you haven't already used my link over in TCGPlayer to get your cards, definitely go ahead and do so. It costs nothing to you and only benefits the channel. I really do appreciate it, and without further ado, let's hop right on into our first topic. I do want to talk about the top 5 decks, and these are in order. So we have the Ryzeal Fiendsmith deck with 37% of the meta tops right now between regular Ryzeal and Ryzeal Fiendsmith. Then we have Maliss Fiendsmith. That's going to be, again, Maliss or Fiendsmith. You're going to have variants where you're not playing those cards and you're playing Shifter, or you're playing those cards and you're just comboing really hard under Lancia, which is nice. Because if they draw phase Lancia you, then you're able to just go off with your Fiendsmith engine, which is like all fine and dandy, and your opponent can't bestial you, which is hilarious. And then if they wait till main phase, then you just punish with talent, because talent should be a main deck 3 of in every deck right now. Then you have the Fiendsmith Kashtira deck coming in at number 3. You have Tenpai, surprise, number 4. The deck's topping like crazy right now. It's insane. And then Yubel. I think that Yubel is the most lackluster out of the 5, but at the same time, still a very real deck. And we'll talk about where to hand trap that as well. So talking about Tenpai, not a whole lot changes, but it is going to be a lot more impactful when you do hand trap. So Droll is very impactful against this deck. They need a lot more consistency cards, and they are still playing the most Charmies, and now they're playing more Go Second cards, but it feels like the hand traps that you throw are going to be a bit more impactful, especially because a lot of times if your opponent has Sengen Summoning, they're activating it. Like, they're actively trying to search a card. So that's where Ogre comes back into play with that one. It's going to be really solid. Of course, there's a chance to just have their engine already, but the odds that they actually need to search off summoning are very high. You can Valor, Imperm, Pydra, or Dora, whichever one they start with, because your opponent needs the search. It just has so few starters now that you need to be able to shut this off as soon as possible and really be able to just make them pass turn. In the battle phase, hitting Biden with the bell is really strong. Again, just having one Kaimin, I hope you have it, right? Because if they don't, there's not a whole lot of things that they can do once they just don't get a body back off the Biden. And then always ashing the Kaimin. You can go ahead and ash other things in this deck already. Like if you wanted to just ash like the Sengen Summoning effect, or if they go normal summon Genroku effect, and you want to ash that, that's perfectly fine. But if you are afraid of the one of Kaimin, which is very real, unless you have like Ash Valor and you like stop a Pydra, and then you're like, well, the odds that they have it are very low. That's really going to be a judgment call on the game time decision, but at the same time, Ash on Kaimin's always correct, but you can hit like a Genroku that tributes to summon, right? That's still really good. As far as Yubel goes, we do have Droll, which is really impactful. We have Bishals, and then we also have Nibiru. Nibiru's a lot crazier now because there's only one Phantom of Yubel, so if your opponent doesn't make it right away and they want it for later, you're going to punish them real hard with Nibiru. And, you know, this is one of those decks, too, where it can still catch you off guard, so make sure that you're on top of your knowledge for this deck, and take this video to heart so you understand, if you play against it, where to hand trap it. The one thing that I think is really underrated right now is playing Bell in your main deck. I think Bell is really solid. The number one most annoying thing about the Fiendsmith cards right now is on your turn, they go Lacrima, target Requiem, summon back the Requiem, summon back the Lacrima, dump Fiendsmith in Paradise. So if you Bishal the Lacrima target, which will just be the Requiem, it stops that. If you bell the Lacrima effect, it stops that. If you wait for them to summon Requiem effect and ash it, that would stop it. So definitely a lot of ways that you can go ahead and just out it before it's a problem. I definitely think that that's been the most annoying. So if your opponent does go Engraver effect and you have a bell, you could always stop it if you really want to, but I definitely like to hold it for the Lacrima. Ash on Samsara, that hasn't really changed. Same thing with the target negation, just absolute magnet that Spirit of Yubel is. You want to make sure that you just stop that card as much as possible. Sequence, of course, you can stop that if you're afraid of like the Desert Ray. You're always ogreing Nightmare Pain if they get to it 100% of the time. But if you do feel like you can't have whatever you're about to activate be negated, you can always chain 2 Desert Ray with Ogre, popping the Desert Ray. And then the Desert Ray just won't negate because it checks on resolution with how many link rating it has attached to it. So that's really solid. Just go ahead and shut that off real fast. Ogre is such a universal card in the game, and it's really solid because, again, we don't really have Gamma anymore because it's at 1, so now we have Ogre, and Ogre has been performing very well these past formats. Now time for Maliss. Unfortunately, Lancia is the biggest problem for this deck, so if you Lancia them, they're going to be in a bad spot. That's why a lot of people are trying out like the Striker cards, or a lot of people are trying out the Fiendsmith cards, or Cash cards. And this just makes the deck a little bit more versatile and having a bit more options under Lancia. And then Nibiru is always going to cook like most decks right now. Nibiru is crazy and it should be a 3 of in your main deck. Bell on the effect of Underground is really solid because your opponent could banish from grave, so it's really good to just go ahead and stop. But there's 2 other targets that I do want to talk about with Bell that I think are really impactful. Either you can bell the GWC that is going to go ahead and reborn pretty much always Whitebinder, or you could just let Whitebinder get summoned and then bell the effect of Whitebinder to banish, just in case your opponent has other ways to get back to it. This is going to be the most efficient because, yes, your opponent will get the body back, but the body doesn't do anything if you have the bell for the banish, right? So that's really important. And then if your opponent tries to bring back a Whitebinder, having Ash is really strong too, because it's all one effect to bring itself back, pay 900 and draw. So that's one thing where you can just Ash and keep it out of the game. You can Ogre Terahertz. Ogre Terahertz is kind of crazy, I'm not going to lie, because they go to send to Save Worm, you get rid of it. There's no Pack Bit, there's no to Save Worm, there's no Terahertz. It's really nice just to be able to clear that, because a lot of times the end board is like a hand trap or 2, a few set back row, and then you also have Terahertz. Your opponent's basically going to be trying to get back to Whitebinder on your turn, so that's one thing that they're going to prioritize. I like Ogreing Terahertz. A lot of people would rather Ogre like a Splash Mage, because if your opponent brings back a body, then they're not able to just go right into a Whitebinder. They're going to have to find more bodies if you just get rid of the Link too. So that's also not a bad option at all. You could hit either one of these, and I think that you'd be perfectly fine. You also have your target negation in this deck, and I think that it's all very mid. Side those out, your Mourners, your Veilers, your Imperms, for things like Ulti Slayer and Lancia, or if you're siding Nibiru, then put those in. Lightning Storm, Duster, there's so many other cards that I'd rather have, to be honest, than these targeting ones here. And it's just because they're not really that impactful at any point in time, and I feel like you're just hand looping yourself using them into this matchup. Now, when we talk about using them into the Fiendsmith variant, I do think that they are very strong. So, game 1, your opponent's going to be making Caesar. Game 2 and 3, they're going to be making Sequence. So that's one thing that you want to keep in mind, is that game 1 Caesar is usually the game plan. Holding Imperm for the Caesar is great, or just Imperm or Veiler onto the Sequence. You do have the option to go ahead and Bishel out that Lacrima or the Engraver, and then you can also bell the Lacrima. Again, I'm probably always prioritizing the Lacrima because I think it's a very annoying interruption, so that's one thing that you can definitely go after if you feel enticed to do so. Now, as for Ryzeal, this deck has definitely put in the most amount of work right now in terms of tops post the new format. Every hand trap under the sun that you see above Duo Drive is going to go at Duo Drive. You just want to be able to stop Duo so they don't get the plug-in and cross. It's going to be the most effective for you. Your opponent does have multiple ways that they can get into the duo drive effect, especially if you have something like Ogre. If they already have up like a Wave King Caesar, they can detach off that. If your opponent has the Plasma Hole Engrave, they can chain Plasma, pitch a spell or trap, summon a Lancer, and then just detach from the Lancer. So there's a lot of ways you can dodge things like Ogre, but you want to make sure that you have everything in your arsenal against the duo drive, because that's going to be very problematic. Shifter against this deck is rough because your opponent doesn't really get to activate too many things. They don't get like the Node Reborn, they can't X. There's a lot of very awkward scenarios with that a lot of times usually just ends on a detonator, which is fine by me because my opponent's not really going full combo on me, especially if they have Fiendsmith cards in their deck. Holding Imperium for Detonator is really impactful. They're going to have plug-in, but that's one thing where they'll usually pop the Detonator and reborn it. So now you just have to deal with one Detonator. You already know that the plug-in's gone. And then Bell on plug-in, of course. You also can use a Bishtil or like Crow if they target one of the light Ryzeals in their grave. And then you can go ahead and just banish it. They won't even get the attach. It just sucks if they target like one of the fire ones, right? So just be careful on that to make sure that they are targeting one in their grave that is light, because it is very possible to happen, and that's just a lesser chance, but still really impactful interaction that you can use against the plugin. Now, against the Ryzeal Fiendsmith deck, the number one thing that I want to mention here is, yes, every hand trap under the sun goes to duo. If your opponent normal summons ice, uses ice effect. If you have a Veiler or an Imperm, you might want to use it. Specifically, if you have an Imperm. If you have a Veiler, you're probably fine to hold it. But if you have Imperm and your opponent normal summons ice, I would Imperm it. Because if they're on the Fiendsmith cards, what's going to happen is you Veiler, Imperm, the ice. Now they need to use one of the effects of the other ones from hand to summon, which locks them into rank 4s, which completely turns off the engine for Fiendsmith. If you don't, they're going to overlay into Exciton with whatever they summon from deck, and also get follow-up, so probably summon Sword, get X, and then make Exciton, and then go Fiendsmith combo. So I really do like Veiler or Imperm onto ice. I think that it's very smart, and it cuts off a different engine in the deck and puts your opponent's board up to being a standard Ryzeal board than much more than it could be. Bell onto Lacrima, still going to be priority for me. You can hit Engraver if you want, holding Imperm for Detonator or the Caesar, and then of course just Bishtiling out either of them Engrave, and then Shifter, Droll, and the Nibiru, all very strong here. Now, as for Fiendsmith Cash, this is going to be a very popular deck at the moment. Hitting the Requiem out of the grave once it's targeted by the Lacrima is going to be very important. Nibiru is really strong once they go for the sequence line. Just clear out the Desiree, then your opponent doesn't really have a whole lot on you at that point. They'll have a couple of hand traps, but they'll usually pass. I'm probably always ashing Requiem. That's usually going to be the choke point. You can hit Tract if you know that there's like the magical musket cards in the deck and you don't want them to get access to that. But a lot of times for me, I'm just hitting Requiem. It's just a lot better in my eyes, and making sure that your opponent doesn't get to use that again this turn. There are niche scenarios where your opponent can use 2 Requiem in a turn, but usually that's like turn 3 or 4. Also, having Ogre for Birth is really strong, because a lot of times your opponent's going to have a Reborn into their Unicorn and turn on Birth and also have the Unicorn Rip. So getting rid of that as soon as possible is going to be super impactful. Ogre onto Desiree, and then shutting down sequence as soon as possible, because this is basically a pure Fiendsmith deck just with a cash engine in it as well, which is usually pretty small. But I do like this deck a lot. I think that it has a lot of potential moving forward, and it already has done so well where it's at. But I do hopefully you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, definitely go ahead and subscribe to the channel, follow my Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and join my Discord. I hope that you all have a wonderful night, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.